Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and the other day I did a video about Jason Wittrock, I believe that was his name, a YouTuber I had only barely heard of, promoting ultra-high calorie ketogenic diets, and just discussing the bullshit involved in that, and a bunch of his followers came in the video. I'll just link the video below. I had to ban a bunch of them because they can't argue a point without throwing insults. And just so people understand that, I always ban people on my channel for that. If you come in and you start in with, oh, you're a fat fuck, you're an idiot, you're a fucking moron, I just hit the ban button. There's no point in reading what you have to say. And people need to understand that's not how you argue a point. Pro tip right here, if you want to create a convincing argument and convince someone that you're right, calling them a fucking idiot at the start of your argument has never in known history ever persuaded someone that you're actually right. Just throwing that out there. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit. Let's talk about this. Because one of the scary things that I saw is that a lot of these people were promoting the insulin obesity hypothesis without actually understanding what this is. And let me make this clear for the low-carb followers out there. I ran a ketogenic diet for a year on this channel. All right, I'm not ignorant of it. I have lost weight before with ketogenic diets. I'm not saying you can't lose weight on them. I've never stated that. I'm also very, very familiar with the works of Gary Taubes, Dr. Ludwig, Dr. Jeff Volek, a lot of these low-carb advocates who are out there. And by the way, you guys need to remember that Gary Taubes has been debunked repeatedly in debates. He's not a scientist, he's a journalist. And a lot of scientists and dietitians have absolutely debunked him. So I really wouldn't take him too seriously. The others, at least Ludwig and Dr. Jeff Volek, have some data to back what they're saying. But this idea that, people come in there and they're like, oh, you're ignorant, you haven't done your research. We're like, really? I've read all the books of most of the experts in the area. I'm familiar with their work. I'm familiar with the research. This isn't ignorance. And it's scary because it's these people who are displaying ignorance. And again, let's discuss the whole insulin obesity hypothesis. The whole hypothesis is that insulin is, a fat storage hormone. It's the only, and the people are even saying in there, oh my God, insulin is the only way the body stores fat. That's fucking insane. That's not even true. That's the sort of stuff you get from reading fad diet books. That's not actually biologically true. Dietary fat doesn't require insulin to be stored. You can have zero circulating insulin. Well, you'd probably die with zero circulating insulin, but if you had zero circulating insulin, you could still store the fat that you eat, all right? There's other mechanisms in place that allow that. You don't require insulin to do that. In fact, insulin doesn't generally do that. The reason people come up with this is that what we've noted is that when circulating insulin levels are high, the body burns glucose as a fuel source and tends not to burn fat. What that ultimately means is, of course, that you're storing the fat that you eat at that point because your body doesn't need to burn it. It's got glucose. Glucose is your body's preferred fuel source, and circulating glucose requires your body to expend insulin. It releases insulin to help store it. But by storing it, that doesn't mean you store glucose as body fat. And people need to understand that. The human beings do not, under normal biological conditions, store carbohydrates as fat. It requires very extreme conditions for that to occur. It doesn't happen to normal people without serious medical issues or without an extreme overfeeding situation. There's got to be something really serious going on. Like if you're only eating 200 or 300 extra calories a day, you're not going to store glucose as body fat. It doesn't really happen under those circumstances. Carbs don't store as fat in Homo sapiens. Don't get the rat studies and stuff confused. Mice and rats store them very easily. Humans don't. We've learned this with a lot of research. What happens with the whole circulating insulin thing is that it's harder for your body to burn fat. Now, the idea then by these people is that, well, we'll just lower circulating insulin by eating mostly fat because insulin doesn't respond to fat. Everything else that you eat, whether it's carbohydrates, protein, alcohol, that's your other 3 forms of calories, require an insulin response. Fat is the only one that doesn't. But that's because your body doesn't need insulin to transport fat. It doesn't need it to burn it, doesn't need it to store it, anything. So it's this weird idea. Now what we have noted is that high circulating insulin levels are correlated with obesity. So people who have high insulin levels all the time tend to get fat easier, but they don't bypass the laws of thermodynamics. All right, they don't bypass the laws of thermodynamics. High circulating insulin levels without overeating makes people hungry, fatigued, tired. They could black out. They go into comas. That's what happens. High circulating insulin levels usually is going to make you hungry and shaky and jittery because it's going to cause hypoglycemia and it's going to make you need to eat more. All right, so it's still calorie driven. And what we have found is that cultures that eat predominantly carbohydrates don't have obesity problems. All right, that's a big thing that people need to understand. And I'll get to that in a minute. But a lot of the people in these comments were trying to argue, well, ever since the government, I guess they mean the U.S. government, they don't realize this, YouTube's international, started advocating lower fat diets, everyone started consuming more sugar, and therefore they got fatter. And it's like, in what world do you live in where your only choices are to eat processed sugar or fat? I mean, yeah, if that's the only food you have available, you're pretty well fucked. Yeah, you're fucked. You're going to be fat and fucking sick if that's all you have to eat is fat and table sugar. But you know what? There's a whole host of foods out there that don't involve sugar. What happens is that people went from eating a bunch of fat to a bunch of processed foods. And I remember Alan Aragon breaking down a chart for this that showed that actually what happened is that it wasn't just the sugar intake. When you look at the charts, as the obesity epidemic has climbed in the U.S., we found an increase in both sugar calories and fat calories. Just because people were avoiding eating red meat and bacon and butter and stuff doesn't mean they weren't eating fat from other sources. They just switched to more refined foods that were palatable that had a bunch of vegetable oils. Like what he had actually found is that over a decade to where there had been an increase in obesity, yeah, there was a large increase in refined sugar intake, but also that people's total calories went up from vegetable oils and stuff also. So refined fats, I mean, that's a bad combination. A bunch of refined fats and a bunch of refined sugars together, yeah, of course you're going to have an obesity problem. But what we find is that cultures that eat predominantly starchy carbs, like even white rice, don't have obesity problems. And that's the problem with people's whole insulin-driven obesity theory. People who live on 60 to 70% of their calories from white rice in Asian countries that haven't added in a bunch of vegetable oils, they haven't added in a bunch of refined sugars, they don't have obesity in those countries. They don't have high circulating insulin levels either, which is shocking to a lot of people because you think of white rice as a high glycemic index carb. But here's the thing. Insulin response to foods isn't based upon the fact of how many carbs you're eating. And that's what people have to understand. The glycemic index of the foods you eat doesn't necessarily indicate how much circulating insulin you're going to have through the day. How sensitive you are to insulin affects that. All right, so people who are sedentary are going to be far more insulin insensitive. They're going to have far more insulin insensitivity, so therefore they're going to produce more insulin as a response to any given amount of carbohydrates. People who are physically active tend to produce less insulin for every amount of food they eat. All right, so they can live on diets of white rice and not get obese. What you also find is that there are foods that promote insulin insensitivity. And that's where we get into the refined sugar. You start seeing insulin insensitivity when refined sugar intakes become too high. And that's because table sugar is 50% fructose. High fructose corn syrup is 55% fructose. When you start chronically consuming at least 50 grams of fructose a day, people start to develop insulin intolerance, right? They develop fatty liver. And the interesting thing is that fructose doesn't have an insulin response. It has no insulin response. Insulin isn't required to transport it, but it does cause insulin insensitivity when consumed in excess. You know what else causes insulin insensitivity? Saturated fat consumed in excess seems to be linked to it also. So insulin insensitivity is what causes the higher circulating insulin levels, and those higher circulating insulin levels are going to be linked with overeating more. And it's still going to be calories in, calories out. When your energy's low, you're jittery, you have lower blood sugar, and more hunger all the time, you're going to eat more calories. You're going to be less active, and you're going to eat more calories. So that's what's going on there. But the thing is, it is ultimately the fat calories that they are consuming that is causing the obesity. All right, the insulin insensitivity is causing people to eat more, and then oftentimes, again, they're eating more fat with it. That's your issue. And this whole idea these people have that calories don't count, that you can overeat on a ketogenic diet, no, you gain body fat. If you eat 300 extra calories of dietary fat every day on a ketogenic diet, more than you burn, you're probably going to gain at least a pound of body fat every month. All right, that's what's going to happen. Because again, when you study it in labs, ketogenic diets have never been found, when you look at meta-analysis, to have like an actual caloric benefit, meaning you can consume more calories in a higher carb diet. It's all still calories in, calories out. And so, these people are coming in here and trying to discuss this stuff like they know what they're talking about. And it's really scary, that they're calling other people ignorant, like as if I haven't researched this stuff and haven't researched both sides of the data and looked at it. But here's the reality, guys. You want to look at epidemiology. You want to look at societies around the world. You want to look at when obesity goes up. It's when refined oils and refined sugars are added into people's diets. That's when you see obesity go up. And it's not carbohydrates that are the cause. It's fructose that is the cause. And it is adding extra low satiety fats into your diet as well that are the cause. It's that combination that causes obesity. It's not carbohydrates, because people who eat even high glycemic index starchy carbs that have no fructose as the majority of their calories, those countries don't have obesity. But you know what? The one culture we have on earth that followed a ketogenic diet is the Inuits. They're not a lean people. They're all slightly overweight. So, it's really interesting that, people want to try to claim that the ketogenic diets are going to be better than a high carb diet. Yet when you compare cultures, when you compare the one culture we have that follows a true ketogenic diet versus countries that consume 70% carbohydrates, even from white rice, which group has the lowest body fat? Which group is the leanest? The high carb ones. All right, and people need to understand all carbohydrates are not equal, and it's not refined grains that's even the problem. It's not grains that are the problem. It is all the fructose coming from refined sugars. That's your problem. But ultimately, you still don't gain body fat at significant rates from eating those. You gain the body fat from the fat that you overeat. So insulin is only one part of the equation here. The obesity epidemic isn't necessarily insulin driven due to high carbohydrate diets. It can be driven due to insulin insensitivity. And insulin insensitivity is caused by high fructose diets and by high fat diets. The only reason people on ketogenic diets are getting away with eating the high fat diet is they aren't eating enough carbs to get an insulin response. But their insulin sensitivity goes down, and that has been noted in the research. People on ketogenic diets become insulin insensitive over time while staying on those diets. And when they go back to eating carbs, that's the reason they feel worse. And that's why people who do cycling ketogenic diets notice they get sleepy and lethargic on their carb up days. It's because the ketogenic diet has made you insulin insensitive to some extent. All right, and therefore you're going to get a much larger insulin response as a result of your carb loading days, and that makes you sleepy, tired, lethargic, all that stuff. But there's your thing, is that the insulin end of it is only due to insensitivity. It's not due to eating large amounts of carbohydrates. It's due to eating foods and having a lifestyle that reduces your insulin sensitivity, which is going to result in less energy turnover because you're going to be less active, and due to lower blood sugar, you're going to get hungrier. So you're going to consume more calories while burning less calories, and that's why it causes obesity. It's not the insulin itself. Insulin does not actually create body fat. It doesn't store fat. That's not how this works. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.